darkness of the far future, there is only war. But what if everything you think you know about hope, heroism, and salvation was a lie carefully crafted by the corpse of a god? What if humanity's greatest protector became its most terrible prison, and the price of survival was not just blood, but the very soul of our species? Picture this. A golden throne buried deep beneath layers of fortified stone and consecrated steel sits at the heart of mankind's greatest city. Upon that throne rests a figure, neither living nor dead, sustained by the daily sacrifice of 1,000 psychers whose screams echo through chambers no mortal ear should hear. His withered fingers have not moved in 10,000 years. His eyes have not opened since the day his most beloved son betrayed him. Yet through this corpse emperor flows a psychic beacon so powerful it illuminates the entire galaxy, a lighthouse in an ocean of madness that allows humanity to navigate the stars. Without him, the species dies. With him, it suffers eternally. This is the Imperium of man, and this is the nightmare we call Warhammer 40,000. But let us step back. Let us journey not just through space, but through time itself, to understand how humanity fell so far from grace. Imagine Earth, but not as you know it. Imagine Holy Terra, a planet-spanning hive of Gothic spires and cathedral manufactories where billions toil in darkness and the sky has not been seen by common men for millennia. This is humanity's birth world, transformed beyond recognition. Its oceans boiled away, its forests replaced with industrial sprawl that reaches into the clouds. At its heart sits the Imperial Palace, a structure so vast that entire armies could march for weeks within its corridors and never reach its end. At the center of that palace, in a sanctum guarded by 10,000 transhuman warriors who have not known sleep in 10 millennia, sits the master of mankind himself, the Emperor.God.Corpse.Prisoner. All these titles and more, but he was not always this way. And then came the Age of Strife. For 5,000 years, reality itself tore apart. The galaxy screamed. Warp storms, tears in the fabric of space-time where the material universe touches something far more terrible, erupted across human space. Worlds that had been connected by faster-than-light travel were suddenly isolated, cut off from one another, left to face the darkness alone. Civilizations collapsed. Technology failed. Demons, entities of pure malevolence born from the darkest emotions of sentient beings, poured through the cracks in reality and fed upon the terror they created. Humanity teetered on the brink of extinction, scattered across 1,000,000 worlds with no hope of reconnection, each pocket of survivors facing their own apocalypse in isolation. But the Emperor had prepared for this moment. On Terra, protected by ancient sciences and his own indomitable will, he began the greatest work of genetic engineering the universe had ever witnessed. He created the Primarchs, 20 demigod sons, each a masterpiece of biological perfection, each designed to embody a specific aspect of human excellence taken to its superhuman extreme. One would be the perfect warrior, another the perfect tactician, a third the perfect architect of civilization itself. These would be his generals, his sons, his partners in the great reconquest of the galaxy. Together they would unite humanity under one banner, destroy the aliens who preyed upon mankind's weakness, and reclaim the stars in the name of reason, science, and the imperial truth. But the ruinous powers, the dark gods who lurk in the Imperium, the psychic realm humans call the Warp, had other plans. Before the infant Primarchs could be raised by their father, chaos reached out from beyond the veil and scattered them across the galaxy like seeds in a storm. They fell upon distant worlds, grew to maturity in alien cultures, and when the Emperor finally found them, each had been shaped by the world that claimed them. What followed was the Great Crusade, 2 centuries of the most brutal reconquest the galaxy had ever seen. The Emperor and his Primarch sons, reunited and each commanding legions of super soldiers called Space Marines, created from their own genetic template, exploded outward from Terra like a tide of steel and faith. Millions of worlds were brought into compliance. Some joined willingly, seeing in the Imperium a chance for protection and prosperity. Others resisted and were crushed beneath the treads of tanks the size of city blocks, and the wrath of warriors who knew no fear. For a time, it seemed humanity might actually achieve the impossible: unity, peace, a secular paradise built on reason where gods and religion would be forgotten, where humanity would ascend to become a psychic species capable of navigating the warp itself with mastery rather than terror. The Emperor's dream was within reach, but pride, as it always does, came before the fall. On a world called Davin, everything changed. Horus Lupercal, the greatest of the Primarchs, the Emperor's favorite son, War Master of the entire crusade, was corrupted by the whispers of chaos. The gods of the warp showed him visions of a future where he was forgotten, where his father had ascended to godhood and abandoned his sons to obscurity. This showed him the imperial truth was a lie, that the warp was not empty but teeming with entities of immense power who offered gifts beyond imagining to those bold enough to claim them. And in his moment of weakness, in his all-too-human need for recognition and glory, Horus fell. What followed was the Horus heresy, the greatest betrayal in human history. Brother turned against brother. Legions that had fought side by side for centuries met on battlefields and tore each other apart. Entire star systems burned as civil war consumed the Imperium. Half the Primarchs sided with Horus, seduced by the promises of chaos or driven by their own grievances against their father. The other half remained loyal, and the galaxy drowned in blood. The war culminated on Terra itself. The walls of the Imperial Palace were breached. Demons walked upon Holy Earth. The Emperor and Horus faced each other in single combat aboard the traitor's flagship, father against son, creator against creation. In that duel, the Emperor was mortally wounded. But before he fell, he struck back with the full fury of his psychic might and obliterated Horus utterly, soul and all, erasing him so completely that not even the gods of chaos could claim what remained. The Loyalists won, but at a cost that can never be repaid. The Emperor was placed upon the Golden Throne, a life support device that keeps his broken body functioning while his psychic consciousness wages an eternal war in the warp, holding back the demonic tides that would otherwise consume Terra itself. He has sat there for 10,000 years, and for 10,000 years the Imperium has slowly rotted around him. The dream of reason died. In its place rose the ecclesiarchy, a church that worships the Emperor as a god, the very thing he fought to prevent. The Inquisition hunts for heresy and corruption with brutal efficiency, burning entire worlds when even a hint of chaos taint is discovered. The Adeptus Mechanicus hoards technology like sacred relics, forbidden to innovate, commanded only to maintain what already exists because all true knowledge is considered a gift from the machine god. This is the Imperium you are about to enter, a galaxy where 1,000,000 worlds sacrifice everything to keep humanity clinging to existence, where war never ends because it cannot end, where hope is the first step on the road to disappointment, and faith in the Emperor is the only currency that matters, where Xenos races beyond counting circle humanity like wolves sensing wounded prey, and the gods of chaos hunger eternally for the souls of every man, woman, and child in the Imperium. But here is the terrible question that keeps the Inquisitors awake at night, the thought they dare not speak aloud. What if the Emperor's greatest creation was not his Primarchs, not his Imperium, not even the Golden Throne that keeps him alive? What if it was something far darker, something even he could not control once set in motion? What if humanity's salvation requires its damnation? What if every prayer whispered in the darkness, every candle lit before the Emperor's icon, every life sacrificed in his name is not faith but fuel for something that grows stronger with each passing century? The Imperium tells its citizens that the Emperor protects, but no one dares ask what he has become after 10 millennia of worship from quadrillions of souls across 1,000,000 worlds. One asks because the answer might shatter everything. Let us look closer at this Imperium, this rotting colossus that bestrides the galaxy like a corpse that refuses to fall. It is not a single unified empire, but a Byzantine nightmare of bureaucracy, stretched across unimaginable distances. A message sent from one side of the Imperium to the other might take centuries to arrive, traveling through the warp aboard ships the size of cities, navigated by psychers who stare into the realm of chaos itself and somehow maintain enough sanity to guide their vessels through the screaming madness. By the time that message reaches its destination, the civilization that sent it may have already fallen to Xenos' invasion, demonic incursion, or simply collapsed under the weight of its own decay. On these 1,000,000 worlds, Life is measured not in individual achievement but in industrial output and bodies available for the endless war machine. Consider a hive world, one of thousands scattered throughout imperial space. Picture towers that reach beyond the clouds, structures so ancient their foundations were laid when the emperor still walked among men. In the upper spires, nobility conducts its elaborate games of political intrigue, feasting on delicacies imported from across the sector while servo skulls. The lobotomized remains of deceased servants with their brains replaced by machinery drift through perfumed halls recording every whispered conspiracy. These nobles have never seen natural sunlight, never breathed air that was not recycled through sacred filters blessed by the Adeptus Mechanicus, never touched soil that was not contained in ornamental gardens tended by slaves. But descend. Go down through the levels where the middle hives process the endless paperwork that keeps the Imperium functioning, where administratum scribes spend their entire lives copying a single document by hand because the sacred work must be done in triplicate and computers are viewed with superstitious dread. Go deeper still, past the factory levels where workers toil for 16-hour shifts manufacturing lasguns and flak armor for the Imperial Guard, the countless billions of normal humans who are thrown into the galaxy's wars with nothing but faith and obsolete equipment. Descend into the underhive where the light of the Emperor has not reached in millennia, where mutants and gangs rule territories measured in city blocks and where the only law is the violence you can bring to bear. At the very bottom, in the sumps where industrial waste has pooled for 10,000 years creating toxic lakes of chemical soup, things that were once human scrabble for survival in the darkness. They have never heard the Emperor's name. They do not know they are part of the Imperium. They are born, they suffer, they die, and their bodies are processed into corpse starch to feed the workers on the levels above. This is the fate of most human beings in the 41st millennium. Not heroic death on the battlefield, not peaceful passing surrounded by loved ones, but anonymous suffering in service to a machine that will grind on without them. Yet from these dregs, the Imperium demands everything. The Imperial Guard recruits entire regiments from hive worlds, taking the fittest specimens and shipping them off to wars on planets they cannot even pronounce. The Departmentum Unitorum, the vast logistics organization that supplies the Imperial military, operates on a simple principle. When one guardsman falls, send 10 more. When a regiment is destroyed, raise 10 more. When a world burns, there are always more worlds. The calculus is brutally simple. Humanity's greatest resource is not its technology, not its faith, not even its space marines. It is the sheer inexhaustible supply of bodies willing to die for the Emperor. But what of those space marines? Those transhuman warriors who stand between humanity and extinction. Each one is a work of genetic art, created through a process so grueling that only a fraction of aspirants survive. Young boys taken from their families are recruited from the most brutal death worlds in the galaxy, undergo surgeries that implant 19 additional organs into their bodies. They receive a second heart, an additional lung, glands that allow them to spit acid and breathe toxic atmospheres, a third kidney, organs that let them absorb the memories of enemies by eating their flesh. Their bones are fused with ceramite, the same material that makes their armor. Their muscles are enhanced beyond human limits. Their minds are indoctrinated with psycho-conditioning that removes fear and doubt. What emerges is no longer entirely human. A space marine stands over 7 feet tall in his unpowered body, and when he dons his power armor, that marvel of technology that amplifies his already superhuman strength and protects him from weapons that would vaporize normal men, he becomes a walking tank. He can fight for weeks without sleep, survive wounds that would kill a dozen men, and operate in environments that would kill unprotected humans in seconds. He is conditioned to know no fear, to see his own death not as tragedy but as honor, to worship his Primarch and the Emperor above all else. Each Space Marine chapter, those 1,000-strong organizations descended from the original legions, maintains its own fortress monastery, often on death worlds or moons orbiting strategic planets. The Ultramarines rule Ultramar, 500 worlds that function as a miniature empire within the Imperium. A shining example of what humanity could be if it were not drowning in its own decay. The Blood Angels, descendants of the angelic Primarch Sanguinius who died defending the Emperor during the siege of Terra, struggle eternally against a genetic flaw that causes them to fall into berserker rages, becoming consumed by the psychic echo of their father's death. The Dark Angels, first among the legions, harbor a terrible secret about brothers who turned traitor during the heresy, and they hunt these fallen across the galaxy with an obsession that borders on madness. And then there are the space wolves, savage warriors from the death world of Fenris who ride into battle howling like the predators their world is named for, who drink and feast between campaigns like ancient berserkers, yet whose loyalty to the Emperor has never wavered despite their resistance to following Imperial doctrine. Each chapter is a culture unto itself, with traditions stretching back 10,000 years. The honor rolls listing heroes who have not lived in millennia, with battle standards that have seen more wars than most civilizations have seen sunrises. But even these demigods are not enough. The Imperium's enemies are legion, and they come from every direction at once. From the eastern fringe comes the Tyrant Hive fleets, extragalactic swarms of bioengineered horrors that devour entire worlds, consuming all biomass and leaving nothing but barren rock behind. They are not evil in any comprehensible sense. They do not hate humanity. They are simply hungry, and the galaxy is their feeding ground. Each hive fleet contains trillions upon trillions of organisms, from the smallest ripper swarm to the towering bio-titans that stand as tall as Imperial knights, and they are all controlled by a single psychic gestalt consciousness called the hive mind that coordinates their assault with terrifying efficiency. From the galactic north, the Necrons awaken. Ancient machines in the shape of skeletal warriors, these were once a flesh and blood species that made a terrible bargain with star gods called the Stand. In exchange for immortality, they surrendered their souls and were transferred into living metal bodies. They slept in tomb worlds for 60 million years while younger races claimed the galaxy, and now they rise to reclaim what they believe is rightfully theirs. They wield technology so advanced it appears as sorcery, weapons that can strip the flesh from your bones while leaving your skeleton standing, devices that can turn entire suns into weapons, ships that phase through reality itself to avoid damage. The Eldari, what humans call Eldar, the scattered remnants of an empire that once dominated the galaxy. Millions of years ago, they were the supreme power in the Milky Way, a civilization of grace and psychic mastery that had transcended the need for labor, where every citizen could shape reality with thought and art. But their perfection became their doom. In their arrogance, they descended into such depths of hedonistic excess that their collective depravity gave birth to a new chaos god, Slaanesh, the Prince of Pleasure, whose birth scream tore reality apart and consumed the heart of the Eldari Empire. Now they cling to existence in massive spacecraft called craft worlds, each one a self-contained nation of billions, or lurk in the webway, an ancient network of tunnels through the warp that allows them to travel the galaxy without risking demonic corruption. They view humanity as crude children playing with forces they cannot understand, and they are not entirely wrong. The orcs are perhaps the most terrifying enemy precisely because they cannot be reasoned with or defeated through conventional means. They are a fungal species that reproduces through spores, meaning that any world that has been touched by orcs is forever contaminated. Kill one and his body will release spores that will grow into new orcs within months. They live for war and nothing else. An orc who is not fighting becomes physically depressed and will seek out combat, even if it means attacking his own kind. Their technology works through a form of psychic gestalt belief. Their weapons should not function by any law of physics, but because millions of orcs believe a shoddily constructed gun will fire, it does. They grow larger and stronger the more they fight, but the biggest warlords standing over 10 feet tall and commanding was massive invasions that can threaten entire sectors. And lurking behind all of this, whispering from the warp, are the chaos gods themselves. Khorne, the blood god, who cares not from whence the blood flows, only that it flows. Nurgle, the plague father, who offers acceptance and twisted immortality through disease. Tzeentch, the architect of fate, who schemes and plots for schemes' sake, changing plans within plans until the very concept of truth becomes meaningless. And Slaanesh, the dark prince, who promises pleasure beyond imagining and delivers only addiction and corruption. Each has their champions among humanity, fallen space marines who betrayed the Emperor during the heresy and now serve chaos as demon princes and warlord. But here is what the Imperium cannot admit. The truth that would shatter the faith of quadrillions, it is losing. Slowly, inexorably, despite the sacrifice of billions, despite the valor of its warriors. Despite 10,000 years of endless war, the Imperium is being pushed back on every front. The boundaries shrink, but worlds fall then are reclaimed. The The bureaucracy becomes more sclerotic with each passing century as the weight of its own processes crushes innovation and adaptation. The Adeptus Mechanicus has forgotten more technology than they retain, worshipping machines they no longer understand how to repair, following maintenance rituals that were once technical procedures but are now religious rites. And then, in the closing years of the 41st millennium, reality itself began to tear. The Great Rift, a massive warp storm that split the galaxy in two, erupted across half of known space, cutting off entire segmentums from Terra. On one side, the Imperium Sanctus maintained some contact with Holy Terra. On the other, the Imperium Nihilus became the Dark Imperium, isolated, desperate, facing extinction alone. It was only the return of something impossible that prevented complete collapse. Gilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, Lord Commander of the Imperium during the Great Crusade, a being who had been mortally wounded by a demon blade 10,000 years ago, returned to life. Through ancient technologies and the intervention of the Eldari, he was healed and awakened to find the Imperium his father built had become everything they fought to prevent. And what he saw disgusted him. An empire built on faith rather than reason. A civilization that had forgotten how to advance and could only stagnate. A species that worshipped his father as a god despite the Emperor's explicit rejection of divinity. Gilliman now leads the Indomitus Crusade, an attempt to reunite the severed halves of the Imperium, bringing with him the Primaris Space Marines, a new generation of enhanced warriors even more powerful than their predecessors. But even he knows the truth that he dare not speak aloud. They are not winning. They are simply losing more slowly. So we return to that question. One that echoes through every imperial cathedral and every battlefield. What has the Emperor become? 10,000 psychers die every day to keep the Astronomicon burning. That psychic lighthouse that allows ships to navigate the warp. They are brought to Terra in the black ships, vessels that traverse the Imperium collecting those cursed with psychic gifts. These are not volunteers. They're children torn from their families, teenagers who showed the slightest flicker of power. Adults who tried to hide their nature but were discovered by the witch hunters who never sleep. They're chained in the holds of ships where they can hear each other's thoughts. A cacophony of terror and despair that grows louder with each jump through the warp. Some go mad before they ever reach Holy Terra. Others claw out their own eyes trying to escape visions of what awaits them. When they arrive at the Imperial Palace, they are processed, examined, categorized. The strongest are taken for training by the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, molded into sanctioned psychers who will serve the Imperium as living communication relays, bound and gagged by psychic wards that prevent their powers from tearing holes in reality. Others are given to the Inquisition to be tested and broken and rebuilt as weapons against the demonic. But the vast majority, those whose power is insufficient for specialized service yet strong enough to threaten those around them, are led through corridors of gold and marble to the chamber that houses the Golden Throne. One who enters that chamber returns. They are connected to machinery that has not been fully understood in millennia, the life force drained to sustain the Emperor's psychic projection across the galaxy. They die screaming, their souls consumed, not just extinguished but devoured, and in their final moments they touch something vast and terrible that wears their father's face but feels nothing like salvation. Some, in those last seconds, try to pull away. They see something in the warp, something that feeds on their worship, something that has been growing stronger for 10,000 years as faith has replaced reason. But it is too late. They are fuel and the fire must burn. This is the Imperium's most carefully guarded secret, known only to the highest echelons of the Adeptus Custodes, those 10,000 guardians who stand watch over the throne room, and to the most senior members of the Inquisition who have clearance beyond clearance beyond. Clearance, the question they dare not answer, is the being sustained by this daily sacrifice, still the Emperor of mankind, or has 10 millennia of worship from quintillions of souls across 1,000,000 worlds transformed him into something else? Has humanity, in its desperate need for salvation, created a fifth chaos god? One that wears a golden mask and speaks of duty and sacrifice while feeding on the very faith, meant to protect against corruption, in the depths of the Inquisition's most forbidden archives, locked behind wards that would kill any unauthorized viewer instantly. Check reports from those who have touched the Emperor's mind directly, sanctioned psychers who were granted audience, who were allowed to approach the Golden Throne and commune with what remains. Their testimonies are contradictory, fragmented, terrifying. One speaks of overwhelming love and compassion. presence that wept for every soul lost in his name. Another describes cold calculation, a mind that viewed all of humanity as tools to be expended in a war that transcends morality. The third wrote only 2 words before taking his own life: he hungers. The Inquisition itself is divided on this question, though none would dare speak it aloud. To those who believe absolutely in the Emperor's divinity, who see every miracle, every impossible victory, every moment when faith has manifested as literal power, as proof that he has ascended beyond mortality to become humanity's true God. They point to the living saints, individuals who have been touched by the Emperor's grace and granted powers beyond understanding, who can walk through enemy fire unharmed, whose very presence inspires Imperial forces to impossible feats. Saint Celestini, who has died and been resurrected multiple times, who appears on battlefields where hope is lost and turns the tide through sheer radiant faith, surely she is proof of divine intervention. But there are others, the radicals who walk dangerous paths in pursuit of knowledge, who have seen too much and understand the terrible irony. They know that belief shapes the warp. They know that the chaos gods were not always gods, but became so through the emotional resonance of mortal species. Korn was born from the first murder, grew strong on countless wars, and now exists as an eternal principle of violence. Nurgle emerged from despair and disease, Tzeentch from hope and scheming, Slaanesh from excess and pleasure. Each is sustained by the emotions that created them. So what happens when quadrillions of humans across thousands of generations pour their faith, their hope, their desperate prayers into a single focal point? What happens when entire worlds conduct ceremonies of worship? When trillions of voices cry out his name in unison? When the very currency of the Imperium becomes faith in the God Emperor? They whisper in shadows about the possibility that the man who once walked among humanity, who tried to build a secular Imperium based on reason and the imperial truth, who explicitly denied his own divinity and punished those who worshipped him, has been drowned by his own cult. That the psychic entity that now resides in the warp, sustained by worship and sacrifice, may have been the Emperor once but has become something else, something that wears his memories like a skin but operates on principles he would have found abhorrent. The ultimate irony that the Emperor's plan to save humanity from chaos has created the very thing he fought to prevent. Larger knew this. The Primarch who fell to chaos, who led the Word-Bearer's Legion into damnation, was the first to worship the Emperor as a god. He built cathedrals across the worlds he conquered, composed prayers and liturgies, turned compliance into conversion, and the Emperor punished him for it, sent Gilliman and his Ultramarines to the Word-Bearer's crown jewel, the perfect city of Monarchia, and ordered it destroyed. Made Larger and his entire legion kneel in the city's ashes while the Emperor himself, projected in psychic glory, denounced their faith as weakness, told them to abandon superstition and embrace the imperial truth. But what Larger discovered in his despair, when he sought truth among the stars and found the chaos gods instead, was that faith is power, that belief shapes reality in the warp, that the Emperor was lying, or perhaps lying to himself, when he claimed gods did not exist. Because in the Imperium, in that realm where thought becomes substance, anything believed by enough minds becomes real. Larger concluded that if the Emperor denied his own divinity, it was either ignorance or the ultimate arrogance of one who had always been a god, pretending to be a man. The Horus heresy was not just about wounded pride or chaos corruption. It was a philosophical war about the nature of reality itself. Horus and those who followed him believed the Emperor was hoarding godhood for himself, that his plan was to ascend alone while leaving humanity and even his sons behind. The visions Chaos showed Horus were not entirely lies. They showed him the imperial cult, showed him a future where the Emperor was worshipped as a god, showed him that the secular paradise his father promised was a deception. Chaos twisted the interpretation, made Horus believe it was intentional betrayal rather than tragic irony, but the core vision was true. Imagine standing in Horus's place. You have conquered the galaxy in your father's name. You have led armies of millions, made decisions that determined the fate of entire civilizations, sacrificed everything for a dream of human unity. And then you are shown that your father's grand plan, the imperial truth you have killed for, is a lie. That he does plan to ascend to godhood, that you and your brothers are tools to be discarded once your usefulness ends, that all your loyalty and love and service means nothing compared to his ultimate ambition. Would you not feel betrayed? Would you not question everything you had fought for? This is the tragedy at the heart of Warhammer 40,000. There are no pure heroes. The The Emperor, for all his power and vision, was fallible. He created 20 sons and failed to understand their emotional needs. He built an empire on lies, telling his people that gods and demons did not exist, even as he made pacts with the chaos gods themselves to create the Primarchs. He claimed to fight for human freedom while establishing the most oppressive authoritarian regime imaginable. He loved humanity in abstract but seemed incapable of loving individual humans. When his sons needed guidance, needed to understand why their crusade mattered and what would come after victory, he withdrew to Terra to work on secret projects he refused to explain, leaving them to make sense of an increasingly pointless war of extermination. Horus, the favored son, the War Master, was not purely evil either. He was proud, yes, and that pride made him vulnerable to chaos whispers. But his rebellion came from a place of genuine grievance. He saw his brother Primarchs being destroyed by the very nature their father had designed into them. He saw Ingrid implanted with neural devices that caused him constant agony and forced him into berserker rages, suffering without relief. He saw Mortarion, who hated tyrants because he had been raised under one, being forced to serve as a weapon of the Imperium's tyranny. He saw Perturbal, the master of siege warfare, being given the most brutal and thankless campaigns while his brothers received glory. When Horus tried to moderate, to advocate for his brothers, to ask their father for understanding, he was dismissed. The warp showed him a possible future, one where these grievances festered for 10,000 years. The Emperor sat on a golden throne worshipped as a god while the Imperium rotted around him, and Horus made a choice. He chose to burn it all down rather than let that future come to pass. He was wrong about his father's intentions, manipulated by chaos. But his core instinct that something was fundamentally broken in the Imperium's design was not incorrect. This is what makes the setting so compelling and so dark. Both sides of the heresy had valid points. The Emperor was right that chaos was the ultimate threat, that humanity needed to be united to survive, that faith and superstition made people vulnerable to warp corruption. But he was wrong about how to achieve these goals, wrong to think he could impose reason through authoritarian force, wrong to believe he could deny the existence of gods while effectively becoming one himself. Horus was right that the Emperor's plan was flawed, that his treatment of the Primarchs was cold and instrumental, that the Imperial truth was unsustainable. But he was catastrophically wrong to think chaos offered a better alternative, wrong to let his pride override his judgment, wrong to believe that tearing down the Imperium would lead to anything but damnation. And now, 10,000 years later, the Imperium is the worst of all possible outcomes. It has become the theocratic nightmare the Emperor fought to prevent, while also being the only thing standing between humanity and extinction. It demands absolute faith, while that very faith feeds the corruption it tries to fight. It claims to protect humanity while grinding trillions of lives into dust in the name of survival. It has become so vast, so complex, so layered with bureaucracy and tradition that no one, not even the resurrected Gilliman, can reform it without destroying the very mechanisms that keep it functioning. Picture Gilliman's return from his perspective. He awakens after 10,000 years of suspended death, healed by Xenos technology that should be heretical, brought back by an alliance with the Eldar who worship gods he knows are real and dangerous. He expects to find his father's dream fulfilled, or at least maintained. Instead, he walks into a cathedral the size of a continent and watches billions of pilgrims prostrate themselves before icons of the Emperor, crying out for salvation, believing absolutely in divine intervention. He enters the throne room and sees his father, the man who was his creator and his greatest inspiration, reduced to a withered corpse bound to machinery, surrounded by the psychic screams of 1,000 dying psychers whose souls are being consumed to keep him alive. He tours the Imperium and sees the rot. Worlds where 90% of the population lives in squalor so that the remaining 10% can maintain ancient rituals no one understands anymore. Forge worlds where the mechanic worships machines and forbids innovation, where rediscovering lost technology is considered more valuable than inventing new solutions. Military organizations so hidebound by tradition that tactical flexibility is treated as heresy. An inquisition that burns entire populations on suspicion, that views every human as potentially corrupt, that would rather destroy a world than risk chaos taint spreading. And he cannot tear it down. Because for all its horror, for all its dysfunction, the Imperium works. It is held for 10,000 years against enemies that should have destroyed it 100 times over. The faith he finds repulsive has manifested real power. He has seen miracles he cannot explain through reason alone. The bureaucracy he despises has kept quadrillions fed and armed across impossible distances. The authoritarianism he hates is the only thing preventing complete collapse into anarchy. He is trapped in his father's nightmare, commanding an empire built on everything they fought against, and he has no choice but to perpetuate it because the alternative is extinction. But there is something else, something Gilliman noticed when he stood before the golden throne and tried to commune with his father. For just a moment, he felt recognition. He felt something that might have been love, or might have been hunger wearing love's mask. And then he felt nothing, as if the presence that wore his father's psychic signature had dismissed him as irrelevant to some larger calculation. In that moment, Gilliman understood the terrible truth. The Emperor may still exist in some form, but whatever he has become after 10 millennia of worship and sacrifice, it is not entirely the man who created the Primarchs. It is something both more and less than human, a psychic entity sustained by faith, operating on a time scale and with priorities that may no longer align with humanity's immediate survival. The question that haunts every corner of the Imperium now is this: they worshipping their salvation or feeding their doom? There are places in the galaxy where reality is so thin that demons walk freely, without needing a summoning, where the screams of the damned echo through the physical world. Time itself becomes meaningless, and a man might age centuries in seconds or live backwards through his own death. The largest of these wounds is the Eye of Terror, a massive tear in space-time where the warp and reality have merged completely, created by the birth scream of Slaanesh when the Eldari Empire fell. For 10,000 years it has festered at the edge of Imperial space, a constant reminder that humanity's war is not against flesh and blood alone, but against the very fabric of existence. Within the Eye, the bitter legions who followed Horus have endured across millennia that are not millennia. For them, time passes differently. A warrior who turned traitor during the siege of Terra might experience only a few subjective years, while 10,000 pass outside. They emerge from the Eye still burning with fresh hatred, still remembering the taste of betrayal as if it happened yesterday. The Black Legion, led by Abaddon the Despoiler, once first captain of the Sons of Horus, has launched 13 Black Crusades from within the Eye, massive invasions aimed at Terra itself. Each has been turned back, but each has also accomplished hidden objectives, weakening the Imperium piece by piece, preparing the ground for something larger. The 13th Black Crusade succeeded in ways the Imperium still does not fully comprehend. The fortress world of Cadia, which had stood for 10,000 years as the ultimate bulwark against chaos, fell. Not through conventional military defeat, though the fighting was among the most brutal in Imperial history. It fell because Abaddon crashed the Blackstone Fortress, an ancient weapon of unimaginable power left over from the war in heaven 60 million years ago, directly into the planet's surface. Cadia, whose pylons had held back the expansion of the Eye of Terror for millennia, shattered. Pylons failed, and the great rift tore across the galaxy like a wound that would never heal. Imagine standing on Cadia in those final moments. You are an Imperial Guardsman, one of billions who have held this world against 13 invasions, whose regimental history stretches back to the heresy itself. Your entire culture is built around one principle: Cadia stands. It is not just a motto but an identity, a promise made to the Emperor that this world will never fall while a single soldier draws breath. You have fought cultists and traitor marines and demonic engines. You have seen your comrades dragged screaming into the warp, watched tanks the size of buildings torn apart by things that should not exist. You have held the line because that is what Cadians do, and then the sky begins to tear. Purple lightning arcs across the heavens, and you can see the Eye of Terror expanding, feel reality itself beginning to unravel. The fortress you defended so fiercely cracks beneath your feet as a structure the size of a continent descends from orbit, burning through the atmosphere, and you realize with perfect clarity that there is no victory here. There is only choosing how you die. Some flee to evacuation ships, and they are not cowards because sometimes survival is the harder choice, carrying the weight of a fallen world forward. Others stand and fire their laskins at the approaching darkness until the very ground opens beneath them, and their last thought is not fear but defiance. Cadia may fall, but Cadia will never surrender. The shockwave of Cadia's destruction rippled through the Imperium like psychic thunder. Billions felt it in their dreams, a moment of collective loss so profound that it transcended individual consciousness. And in that moment of weakness, the great rift exploded into existence. From the Eye of Terror to the Haddix anomaly on the opposite side of the galaxy, a massive warp storm now bisects Imperial space. On the maps in the segment and fortress command centers, cartographers stare at representations of territory that is no longer connected, worlds that can no longer receive supplies or reinforcements, entire sectors that have gone dark and may never be reached again. This is what it means when the Imperium says the galaxy burns. Half of their territories are now in the Imperium Nihilus, the dark side where the Astronomican cannot reach, where warp travel is even more dangerous than before, where chaos incursions have multiplied 100-fold. Worlds that went generations between daemonic attacks now face them weekly. Entire subsectors have been overrun and transformed into demon worlds where the laws of physics no longer apply, where cities are built from screaming flesh and rivers run with blood that whispers your sins. The other half, the Imperium Sanctus, maintains contact with Terra but faces its own cascade of crises. With half the Imperium effectively cut off, the demand for resources has doubled while supply has halved. Forged worlds that produced weapons for the entire sector now struggle to arm even their own defenders. Agricultural worlds that fed billions now must be triaged, some chosen for continued protection while others are quietly written off as expendable. The calculus of survival has become even more brutal, and those who make these decisions do so knowing that every choice damns millions, but might save billions. Watching all of this unfold with predatory interest are the Xenos races who sense weakness. The Tyrant and Hive fleets have intensified their assault with tendrils from multiple directions converging on Imperial space as if drawn by some terrible intelligence. The Necrons, ancient and patient, have accelerated their awakening, entire tomb worlds rising from beneath the surface of planets humanity thought it owned. The Orcs, sensing the greatest fight the galaxy has ever seen, are gathering in numbers that blot out stars, entire systems going dark as green-skinned hordes strip them of resources to fuel an upcoming war that could dwarf all previous invasions. But it is the actions of the Tau that perhaps reveal most clearly how desperate humanity's situation has become. This young race, barely a blip on the galactic timeline, reaches the greater good and offers peaceful integration into their empire. They are technologically advanced, their weaponry efficient, and their society organized with ruthless pragmatism. And Imperial worlds cut off from Terra, besieged on all sides, are defecting, not because they have lost faith in the Emperor, but because the Emperor's ships do not come, his armies do not arrive. His protection exists only in prayer while the Tau offer tangible salvation. Each world that joins the Tau Empire is a knife in the heart of Imperial ideology, proof that faith alone cannot hold an empire together when the material realities of survival demand pragmatic action. In the highest councils of Terra, the Senatorum Imperialis convenes to govern in the Emperor's name. Those who understand that the Imperium is approaching a critical threshold. They have models, predictions based on 10,000 years of data. Algorithms run on cogitator banks the size of hive spires. The projections vary in their details but converge on a singular conclusion. At current rates of attrition, the Imperium will cease to exist as a coherent entity within 500 years. Not destroyed through single defeat, but fragmented through 1,000 cuts, broken into isolated pockets that will be consumed one by one. Gilliman knows this. It is why his Indomitus Crusade is not merely military reconquest, but a desperate attempt to restructure the Imperium's fundamental systems before collapse becomes inevitable. He has introduced the primer Space Marines, warriors whose very existence breaks 10,000 years of tradition, and he has faced resistance from chapter masters who view any deviation from the Codex Astartes he himself wrote as heresy. He has tried to reform the administratum only to discover that the bureaucracy is so deeply entrenched that removing any piece causes the entire structure to spasm. He has attempted to negotiate with Xenos races, recognizing that humanity cannot fight on all fronts simultaneously, and been denounced by the ecclesiarchy for even suggesting such pragmatism. And through it all, he carries the knowledge that his father, if he still exists in any meaningful sense, either cannot or will not intervene directly. The Emperor has not spoken clearly in 10,000 years. Those who claim to hear his voice might be experiencing genuine psychic contact, or might be delusional, and there is no reliable way to distinguish between the two. The tarot of the Emperor, used by sanctioned psychers to define his will, gives answers so vague and contradictory that they can justify any action. Saints manifest his power, but their missions are often localized, personal, disconnected from any grand strategy. So perhaps the Emperor is fighting a war on a level beyond mortal comprehension, holding back demonic hordes in the warp itself. His consciousness spread so thin across the psychic realm that he cannot focus on individual crises. Or perhaps the being sustained by daily sacrifice of 1,000 psychers is so changed from the man who created the Imperium that it no longer thinks in terms humans can understand. Or perhaps, and this is the thought that keeps Gilliman awake during the few hours he allows himself to rest, the Emperor is simply dying, has been dying for 10 millennia, and the psychic beacon they worship is the death scream of a god stretched across time. There's a place within the Imperial Palace that Gilliman visits when the weight of his duty becomes too heavy to bear alone. It is not the throne room, though he has stood before his father's ruined body and felt only cold psychic presence, where once there was warmth. It is not the Chamber of Heroes where the names of all who died at the Siege of Terra, i.e. inscribed on walls that stretch for miles. It is a simple room preserved exactly as it was during the Great Crusade, where the Emperor and his primarchs would gather after campaigns to share wine and speak of the future they were building. The furniture is too large for normal humans, sized for demigods. The table still bears scorch marks from where Vulcan accidentally set fire to it during a disagreement with Ferrus Manus. The window looks out on the Himalayas, though what is visible now is not mountains but the endless urban sprawl that has buried them. Gilliman sits in this room and tries to remember what hope felt like. He tries to recall the certainty he once had that their crusade was just, that the galaxy could be made rational, that humanity deserved to inherit the stars through a right of capability rather than desperation. He remembers conversations with his brothers, arguments about philosophy and governance, debates that sometimes turned to violence because primarchs felt emotions with superhuman intensity. He remembers Sanguinius, the angel whose death still echoes through his sons 10,000 years later, who once told him that beauty was humanity's greatest weapon against chaos because the ruinous powers could corrupt any strength but struggled to pervert genuine appreciation for creation. And he wonders if Sanguinius was wrong. If beauty has any place in a galaxy that demands only endless sacrifice, if there is any future worth fighting for beyond simple survival, any vision that justifies the mountains of corpses upon which the Imperium is built. The door opens without his permission, which means it can only be one group who would dare. 3 figures enter, their golden armor gleaming even in the dim light. Adeptus Custodes, the Emperor's personal guards, warriors who are to Space Marines what Space Marines are to normal humans. They do not kneel, for they kneel to none save the Emperor himself, and they look upon even a returned primarch with eyes that have seen 10,000 years of service. The leader speaks, his voice carrying harmonics that suggest augmented vocal cords. Lord Gilliman, we have detected anomalous psychic readings from the throne room. The Emperor stirs. For a moment, Gilliman allows himself to feel something he has not permitted since his return. Not hope exactly, but its shadow. The possibility that answers might exist, that his father might finally speak clearly, might explain the plan that requires such monstrous sacrifice, might justify everything. How long? He asks. Unknown. The last time readings spiked this significantly was during the birth of the Great Rift. Before that, there has been nothing comparable in recorded history. Gilliman rises. Round the galaxy, events are aligning that none of them fully comprehend. The Tyranids are exhibiting coordinated behavior that suggests they are fleeing from something in the intergalactic void, not hunting but running. The Necrons are excavating sites of the war in heaven, seeking weapons they buried 60 million years ago because they were too terrible to use even in that apocalyptic conflict. The Eldari Farseers, who can see potential futures branching through probability, have gone suddenly silent, their predictions ending at a point mere decades ahead as if something is preventing them from seeing what comes next. And in the warp, the Chaos Gods are gathering their strength, not fighting among themselves as they have for eternity, but preparing, focusing, as if they sense something approaching that dwarfs even their endless hunger. The question Gilliman has been avoiding, the question no one wants to ask because the answer might shatter the last foundations of faith, rises to his lips unbidden. If the Emperor speaks, how will we know it is truly him speaking and not what he has become? The custodian meets his gaze, and Gilliman sees reflected in those ancient eyes his own terrible doubt. We will not. We can only listen and choose what we believe. They walk together through corridors of gold toward the throne room, toward whatever revelation awaits. Behind them, the empty chamber where Primarchs once dreamed of better future sits in silence, and through the window, terror burns beneath an uncaring sky. The throne room is not a room, but a cathedral of sorrow carved from the bones of old Earth. Its ceiling rises beyond sight, lost in shadows that predate the Imperium. Its walls are lined with the names of every soul who has died feeding the golden throne, billions upon billions of psychers whose vital screens are etched in gold leaf by servitors who have performed this task for 10,000 years without rest or understanding. The air itself tastes of ozone and despair, thick with psychic resonance that makes even Gilliman's genetically enhanced mind ache. The custodians who guard this place stand motionless as statues, and perhaps some of them are statues, warriors who died standing and were simply left in position because moving them would break a vigil that must never end. At the chamber's heart, the golden throne rises like a monument to hubris. It is both beautiful and terrible, a fusion of technology so advanced it appears as sorcery and organic components that should not exist in any machine. Tubes the size of transit tunnels pulse with fluids that might be blood or might be liquid psychic energy. Gears carved from materials that do not exist in the periodic table grind with mathematical precision. And at the center, barely visible through layers of protective fields and mechanical interfaces, sits what remains of the Emperor of Mankind. Gilliman has stood before this throne dozens of times since his return. Each time, he searches for recognition in that withered face. Each time, he finds only absence. The Emperor's eyes are open but do not see. His mouth moves but makes no sound. His fingers, little more than bone wrapped in parchment skin, occasionally twitches of trying to grasp something forever beyond reach. This is the being that conquered the galaxy, that stood against chaos gods and ancient evils beyond naming, reduced to a corpse that cannot die because its death would doom a species. But now, something is different. The psychic pressure in the chamber has increased to the point where reality itself seems thin. Gilliman can see through the veil without trying, can perceive the roiling chaos of the warp pressing against the material world like water against glass. And he can see something else, a presence, vast beyond comprehension, seated not on the physical throne, but on a throne of souls in the Imperium, feeding on the faith of quadrillions, sustained by worship that pours into it like a river of devotion. It wears the Emperor's face, but it is not the Emperor. Or it is the Emperor and everything else besides. Or perhaps the distinction no longer matters. The present speaks, and it speaks not with sound, but with psychic force that bypasses Gilliman's ears entirely. Every psyker in the Imperial Palace collapses simultaneously, their minds unable to contain even the echo of this communication. 3 of them die instantly, their brains simply shutting down from overload. The custodians drop to one knee, an unprecedented break in protocol that reveals the magnitude of what is occurring. Gilliman alone remains standing, his Primarch physiology allowing him to endure what would obliterate lesser beings. And the message he receives is not the clear direction he desperately hoped for. It is not wisdom or strategy or explanation. It is something far more terrible. He sees everything all at once. He sees the Emperor during the Unification Wars. Sees him slaughter billions to bring order to Terra. Sees the cold calculation behind every decision as he determined that the ends justified any means. He sees the deal struck with the Chaos Gods on Malek, the terrible bargain that gave him the knowledge to create the Primarchs, the price that was always going to come due. He sees the Emperor's true plan, not the lie he told his sons about a secular Imperium, but the actual goal to starve the Chaos Gods by eliminating religion and emotion itself, to create a humanity so rational and cold that it would no longer feed the warp, even if that meant surrendering everything that made humans human. He sees the Emperor's failure, sees him realize too late that you cannot eliminate emotion from a species without destroying what makes that species worth saving. Sees him understand in his final moments before the throne that he has created the very thing he sought to prevent, that his denial of divinity has made his eventual godhood inevitable, that the Imperium would twist into a theocratic nightmare precisely because he tried to prevent it through authoritarian force. And he sees what the Emperor has become, a psychic entity in the warp that has consumed his original consciousness like a flame-consuming candle wax. It remembers being human. It remembers being the Emperor, but it is no longer either. It is belief made manifest, faith given form, the collective unconscious of humanity's need for salvation crystallized into something that thinks and acts but does so according to rules that mortal minds cannot follow. It loves humanity with the same love that a fire loves fuel. It protects the Imperium the way a parasite protects its host, ensuring survival only because its own existence depends on it. The psychic communication continues, and Gilliman sees the future or futures, branching probability spiraling out into infinity. He sees timelines where the Imperium falls and humanity is devoured by tyranids. Timelines where chaos victory transforms every world into a demonic hellscape. Timelines where the Necrons awaken fully and scour all organic life from the galaxy. But he also sees something else. A narrow path, almost impossibly thin, where humanity survives. Not triumphant, not glorious, but alive. And the price for that survival is everything. The continued sacrifice of psychers, the grinding oppression of the administratum, the brutal zealotry of the ecclesiarchy, the Inquisition's terrible choices. All of it is necessary. All of it is the only way to buy enough time for humanity to adapt, to evolve, to eventually transcend into something that can face the galaxy's horrors without breaking. The Emperor, or what the Emperor has become, is not evil. It is simply operating on a timescale measured in millennia and with a definition of victory that includes an acceptable loss of 99% of all human life if that 1% survives to continue the species. Gilliman understands in that moment why his father withdrew from the crusade. Not because he was working on secret projects in the webway, though that was part of it, but because he had seen this future coming and could not bear to tell his sons that their father's love was conditional, calculated, a tool he used to bind them to his purpose rather than genuine affection. The Emperor created the Primarchs to be weapons, and like any good general, he knew that weapons must eventually be expended. The vision breaks. The psychic pressure vanishes as suddenly as it appeared. Gilliman stumbles, catching himself against a pillar, his transhuman body shaking from the effort of containing what he has witnessed. The custodians rise slowly, their auramite armor scorched by psychic feedback. Throughout the palace, Medicaid teams rush to treat psychers who are screaming about angels and devils and something that was both and neither. And on the golden throne, the Emperor's withered hand moves. Just a fraction. His fingers curl as if grasping something invisible. And then stillness returns, the corpse returning to its eternal vigil. Gilliman walks from the throne room like a man walking from his own execution. The custodians do not follow. They understand that what he carries now is a burden that must be borne alone. He moves through corridors that suddenly feel like the halls of a tomb, past servitors that might as well be ghosts beneath arches inscribed with prayers to a god who is both real and false. He finds himself in the Chamber of Heroes, standing before a wall that bears his own name alongside those of his brothers. The loyalists are inscribed in gold, the traitors in black. But standing here now, having seen what he has seen, Gilliman wonders if that distinction was ever as clear as they wanted to believe. Horus was wrong to betray their father, wrong to fall to chaos, wrong in his methods and his means. Or was he wrong about everything? Was there not some kernel of truth in his accusation that the Emperor had betrayed them first? The door opens behind him. He does not turn. He knows who it is by the weight of her presence, the psychic signature that marks her as touched by something beyond mortal understanding. Saint Celestini, the living saint, the woman who has died and been resurrected by the Emperor's grace more times than anyone can count. She has fought at Gilliman's side during the Indomitus Crusade, and he has seen her perform miracles that have no rational explanation. You spoke with him, she says. Not a question, a statement of fact. I saw something that was once him, Gilliman replies. I am no longer certain they are the same thing. Does it matter? Her voice is soft, almost sad. The Imperium needs faith. The soldiers who hold the line need to believe their sacrifices mean something. The worlds that in your endless suffering need to believe salvation awaits. Whether the Emperor is a man, a god, or something between, his existence gives them hope. And hope, Lord Regent, is the only resource we have in unlimited supply. Hope built on lies is just another prison. The words come out more bitter than he intended. All faith requires belief in things unseen. That is not a lie. That is trust. She moves to stand beside him, looking up at the names on the wall. You seek absolute truth in a galaxy where truth shifts with perspective. You want clear answers in a universe built on mystery and contradiction. But perhaps that is the Emperor's final lesson. That we must choose what we believe, not because it is proven, but because belief itself has power. Gilliman turns to her, and for the first time since his return, he allows himself to show vulnerability. I have seen what faith becomes. I have seen worlds where children are worked to death and manufacturers consecrated to the Emperor's glory. I have seen inquisitors burn entire populations on suspicion. I have seen the ecclesiarchy grow fat on tithes while the faithful starve. Can I support a system built on such suffering? Because the alternative is extinction. Her voice carries absolute certainty. You have fought the Tyranids. You have seen what the Necrons do to organic life. You know what chaos promises. The Imperium is terrible, yes. It is cruel and unjust and built on mountains of corpses. But it is also the only thing standing between humanity and complete annihilation. Sometimes the choice is not between good and evil, but between survival and death. That is what the Emperor showed me. Gilliman admits that every horror, every sacrifice, every brutal choice is necessary, that the mathematics of survival require these costs. But Celestini, if we become monsters to fight monsters, what are we saving? What is left of humanity worth preserving? This. She gestures around them, at the chamber, at the palace beyond, at Terra, and the million worlds that orbited metaphorically, if not literally. All of it, the good and the bad, the hope and the horror. Humanity is not one thing or another. It is everything all at once. The saints and the sinners, the heroes and the cowards, the faithful and the doubting. Want to save humanity without its flaws, but the flaws are part of what makes us human. The capacity for faith, even blind faith, even faith in lies, is inseparable from the capacity for hope and love and sacrifice. Gilliman is silent for a long moment. He thinks of the guardsmen on Cadia firing their weapons until the planet broke beneath them. He thinks of the psychers who walk willingly to the Golden Throne because they believe their deaths serve a greater purpose. He thinks of the missionaries who carry the Imperial creed to worlds that have never heard it, knowing they will likely die but believing the message is more important than their lives. He thinks of the uncounted billions who toil in darkness and never see the results of their labor but continue anyway because they trust that somewhere someone is making all this suffering meaningful. And he makes his choice not because he believes the Emperor is good or just or even right, but because someone must bear the weight of terrible decisions. And he is perhaps the only being in the galaxy besides the Emperor himself who can endure that burden without breaking. Then we continue, he says quietly. We fight not because victory is certain, but because surrender is unthinkable. We sacrifice not because we know it matters, but because we choose to believe it does. We are damned for it. If history judges us as monsters who should have chosen differently, at least we will have bought humanity time to make that judgment. Celestini nods, and there is sorrow in her eyes, sorrow and understanding, and something else that might be pride. That is all any of us can do, Lord Regent. Choose what we believe and fight for it until our last breath. They stand together in silence, a resurrected Primarch and a living saint, beneath names of heroes and traitors and beyond the walls of the palace. The Imperium grinds onward through another day of survival measured in sacrifice. Across the galaxy, the war continues. On Armageddon, orc hordes crash against Imperial defenses in a conflict that has raged for decades with no end in sight. On Baal, the Blood Angels defend their homeworld against tyrant swarms that blot out the stars, fighting with the fury of angels who know they are witnessing their own extinction. On Cadia's ruins, scattered survivors who refused evacuation wage guerrilla war against Chaos forces, their only banner the words painted in blood on broken walls, Cadia stands. In the webway beneath Terra, the Emperor's psychic projection fights an eternal battle against demons that humanity will never see, holding closed gates that must never open. On a billion worlds whose names will never be recorded in any history, ordinary humans live and die without ever knowing the cosmic horrors that circle their existence like sharks in dark water. This is Warhammer 40,000, not a story of heroes and villains, but a tapestry woven from tragedy and defiance. It is a universe where the only certainty is suffering, where hope is a weapon as dangerous as any bolter, where faith is both salvation and damnation. It is a setting that asks the most fundamental question any civilization must answer. What are we willing to sacrifice to survive, and at what point does survival cease to be worth the cost? The Emperor sits on his golden throne, neither living nor dead, worshipped by quadrillions as a god he claimed not to be. Every day, 1,000 psychers die screaming to sustain his existence. Every day, the Astronomicon burns, allowing humanity to navigate the stars. Every day, the choice is made again, continue the sacrifice or let the species die. There is no third option. There's no clever solution that saves everyone. There is only the mathematics of survival, brutal and absolute. Gilliman walks the halls of Terra and carries the weight of billions of decisions that will damn millions to save billions. He knows now what his father knew 10,000 years ago. The terrible secret that broke lesser beings who glimpsed it. There is no winning. There is only buying time. The Imperium will not last forever. No empire does. But perhaps it can last long enough for humanity to evolve, to adapt, to become something capable of facing the galaxy's horrors without the crutch of faith, or the prison of authoritarianism. Perhaps in another 10,000 years, the species will have transcended the need for emperors and gods. Or perhaps it will have fallen, consumed by Xenos or chaos or its own decay, and some other race will inherit the stars and wonder what humanity might have become if it had chosen differently. But that is a question for futures that may never arrive. In the present, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, and war demands soldiers. Consider the Space Marine standing watch on some forgotten border world. His armor scarred by 100 battles, his chapter's heraldry faded but still visible. He was taken as a boy and remade into something transhuman. He will never know love in any romantic sense. He will never create art or write poetry or raise children. His entire existence is calibrated for one purpose: to kill the enemies of the Emperor. With maximum efficiency, he could question this. He could rebel against the life chosen for him before he could understand what he was surrendering. But he does not, because he has seen what waits in the darkness. He has fought tyrannids and knows they will consume everything if not stopped. He has battled demons and understands that chaos is not an enemy that can be negotiated with or reasoned with, only fought with absolute conviction. So he stands his watch. He cleans his bolter with ritualistic precision. He recites the litanies of hate and means every word. Not because he is brainwashed or stupid or incapable of doubt, but because someone must stand between humanity and oblivion, and he has been given the strength to be that someone. His sacrifice is absolute and willing, and it matters precisely because it is a choice made in full knowledge of what is being surrendered. Consider the guardsman conscripted from some high world he will never see again, given a laskin and flak armor that will not save him from most of the things he will face, and told to hold a trench against enemies that exist beyond his comprehension. He is not a superhuman warrior. He is not blessed by saints or enhanced by technology. He is simply a human, fragile and mortal, armed with equipment that would have been obsolete 10,000 years ago. He knows with mathematical certainty that he will die. Most guardsmen do not survive their first engagement. Those who do rarely survive their second. Yet he fixes his bayonet and waits for the order to advance. He does this not because he is too ignorant to be afraid, but because he has seen the alternative. Planets consumed by tyrannids where even the microbes are devoured. The worlds touched by chaos where reality itself becomes a nightmare from which there is no waking. He fights because someone must, and the Emperor protects not by granting safety but by giving meaning to sacrifice. His death will buy perhaps 30 seconds for his squad to advance. Those 30 seconds might contribute to a victory that saves his home world. Or might not. He will never know. But he makes the choice anyway, and in that moment of defiance against a universe that views his existence as irrelevant, he becomes something more than human. He becomes hope made flesh. Consider even the cultist, the one who turned from the Emperor's light and embraced chaos. She was not born evil. She was born on a world where children worked themselves to death in manufacturums, where prayer was mandatory but food was scarce, where the ecclesiarchy grew wealthy while the faithful starved. She prayed for deliverance and received only platitudes. She watched her family die of diseases that could have been cured if the tithes demanded by the Imperium had not stripped her world of resources. And when a voice in the darkness offered her power, offered her the ability to take revenge on those who had failed her, can we truly say her choice was incomprehensible? Chaos corrupts, but it also offers truth. The terrible, awful truth that the universe is not fair, that suffering is not ennobled by purpose, that the Emperor's protection is an empty promise for most of humanity. She made her choice knowing it would damn her soul, and she made it anyway because damnation with power felt preferable to powerless victimhood. She is a villain in the Imperium's narrative, but she is also a symptom of everything wrong with the system, proof that faith alone cannot sustain an empire built on brutality. These are the citizens of the 41st millennium. Saints and sinners, heroes and monsters, and most occupying that vast gray space between extremes where humans actually live. They are not fighting for a bright future because no bright future exists. They are fighting for the right to have any future at all, even if that future is just more of the same grinding struggle. They have inherited a galaxy where all the grand dreams have failed, where the Emperor's vision of secular paradise became a theocratic nightmare, where the promise of prosperity became an endless war of survival. And they fight anyway, because the alternative is to surrender, and surrender means extinction. This is what Warhammer 40,000 offers that few other settings dare to explore. A universe without easy answers. There is no golden ending where the good guys win and everyone lives happily. There's no clever solution that solves all problems. There's only the choice made again and again across a million worlds. To continue despite hopelessness, to fight despite inevitable loss. To maintain faith even when that faith is built on foundations of sand and blood. Perhaps that is the Emperor's true gift to humanity. Not protection or salvation or victory, but permission to keep fighting even when defeat seems certain. The Imperium will fall eventually. All empires do. But in the meantime, in the precious hours bought by sacrifice, humans get to be human. They get to love and hope and dream even in the shadow of horrors beyond imagining. They get to stand on the walls and scream defiance at the darkness, knowing they will lose but refusing to go quietly. Guilliman returns to his chambers as Terra's artificial sun sets over the palace. From his window, he can see the sprawl of the Hive City stretching to the horizon, billions of lights representing billions of lives that continue despite everything. Somewhere in that vast human ocean, a child is being born. Somewhere, lovers are embracing. Somewhere, an artist is creating beauty that will be forgotten by history but matters to the person creating it. Somewhere, a soldier is cleaning her weapon and preparing for a deployment she will not return from. Somewhere, a priest is offering comfort to the dying. Somewhere, a scholar is preserving knowledge that might survive the next catastrophe. And Guilliman understands, finally, what it means to serve the Imperium. Not to save it, because it cannot be saved. Not to perfect it, because it is too broken for perfection. But to buy it time. Time for all those small moments to occur. Time for humanity to be human with all the beauty and horror that entails. Time for the species to stumble forward toward whatever destiny awaits, whether that be transcendence or extinction. He thinks of his father or what his father has become, and he whispers a question into the darkness that will never receive an answer. Was this what you saw? Is this the future you sacrificed everything to create? Endless war, endless suffering, endless faith in a lie you told to protect us from an even greater lie. The only response is silence and the distant hum of Terra's machinery. The eternal heartbeat of a dying empire that refuses to acknowledge its own mortality. And perhaps that is answer enough. Perhaps the Emperor, in his wisdom or madness or transformation into something beyond wisdom and madness, understood that humanity's greatest strength is not its technology or its warriors or its faith. It is stubbornness, the absolute refusal to accept defeat even when victory is impossible. The determination to stand and fight not because there is hope of winning, but because lying down and dying is not in our nature. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But war implies resistance. It implies struggle. It implies that somewhere, despite everything, humanity still believes it is something worth fighting for. And as long as that belief persists, as long as soldiers stand watch and psychers fuel the throne and citizens live their small, quiet lives in the shadow of cosmic horror, the Imperium will endure. Not forever. Nothing lasts forever. But long enough for this story to continue. Long enough for the next generation to inherit the burden and make their own choice about whether to carry it forward. This is Warhammer 40,000. This is the universe where hope is the first step toward disappointment, where faith is a weapon and a chain, where the only certainty is suffering and the only nobility is found in choosing to suffer anyway for something beyond yourself. It is a setting that asks you to stare into the abyss and find meaning not in divine purpose or ultimate victory, but in the simple act of refusing to surrender. To stand on the walls of existence and scream your defiance at a universe that wants you dead, knowing you will lose but refusing to make it easy. And somehow, impossibly, beautifully, tragically, humanity endures. The Emperor protects, not because he is good or just or even truly aware in any comprehensible sense, but because as long as someone believes he protects, as long as faith has power in the warp, as long as sacrifice is given meaning by those who choose to make it, the beacon burns. The astronomican shines through the darkness. The Imperium of man holds the line for one more day. There is only war, but there is also duty, honor, sacrifice, and the space between those concepts and the choices made by individuals who will never be remembered by history but who choose righteousness anyway. There is something that might, if you squint, if you allow yourself a moment of hope in this grim darkness, resemble grace. The Emperor protects, even if the Emperor is dead, even if what wears his name is something new and terrible, even if protection means only granting us the strength to protect ourselves. He protects and we endure and the galaxy burns and still we fight. For what else is there to do?